Tuesday, 4:12 p.m. The tide is going out, and so is my patience. Mr. Cutter, this dock is now association property, Marlene Sinclair says, tapping her clipboard like it's a gavel. You'll need to make an appointment if you want ferry access going forward. I don't say anything. I just look at the padlock she's had bolted onto the gate my great-grandfather built with his own two hands in 1899. Behind her, a chain-link fence cuts off Cutter's Landing, the only way on or off Saltmarsh Point that doesn't involve a 2-hour drive around the bay. 61 homes back there, one clinic, no bridge, just water, and a rope ferry that's run every single day since 1891, rain or shine, war or peace. Marlene's white Range Rover is parked crooked across the boat ramp. Her blazer probably costs more than my monthly pension. Her sunglasses stay on the whole time she talks to me, like she can't be bothered to actually look a man in the eye while she takes his family's dock. Here are the numbers, so you understand what's coming. The Saltmarsh Point Homeowners Association has collected $2.4 million in ferry membership shares over 4 years. 61 households pay $340 a month for a service that used to be free. And starting this week, Marlene's board just voted themselves a $180 landing fee every time a resident wants to cross the water to see a doctor, bury a parent, or get to work. By the time this story ends, Marlene Sinclair will owe the state of Washington and 61 families more than $2.6 million, and almost none of it will be about a boat. What she doesn't know yet, what nobody on this peninsula knows yet, because I've been gone 26 years wearing a Navy uniform, is that the dock she just padlocked and the ferry franchise that makes it legal to cross this channel at all were never hers to take. They were never even the association's. They're mine. They've been mine since the day my grandfather's will was read, and no board resolution, no clipboard, no chain-link fence changes what's sitting in a filing cabinet 40 miles away in the county recorder's office. So go ahead, Marlene, lock the gate. I'm about to lock both of them. If you're watching this from a place where the HOA thinks it owns the sidewalk, the pool, the mailbox, even the air you breathe, drop a comment and tell me where you're from. Because what happened next on Saltmarsh Point is the kind of thing every homeowner in America needs to see before it happens to them. My name is Walter Cutter. I'm 66 years old, and until 11 months ago, I was a civil engineer with the United States Navy. The kind who spends 30 years building piers, seawalls, and floating causeways in places most people can't find on a map. I retired a chief warrant officer. I came home to bury my wife's ashes next to my parents and to finally sit at the table my great-grandfather built by hand. A slab of red cedar, 3 inches thick, with his initials, EC, carved into the underside where nobody but family ever looks. Ezra Cutter founded the ferry crossing in 1891. Back then, Saltmarsh Point wasn't a peninsula full of vinyl-sided vacation homes. It was 6 oyster families and a lighthouse keeper, cut off from the mainland by a half-mile channel that ran fast and cold and mean at low tide. Ezra built a raft first, then a proper cable ferry, hand-cranked, hauling wagons and coffins and mail sacks across that water twice a day. He got a state ferry franchise in 1893, an actual license granted by the territorial government, giving the Cutter family the legal right and the legal responsibility to operate that crossing. That franchise passed down. My grandfather Silas ran it through 2 world wars. My father Thomas ran it until his hands gave out from arthritis, and then it came to me. On paper, anyway, tucked into a will nobody in this new development ever bothered to read, because why would they? To them, the ferry was just a ride, a convenience, something the association apparently handled. I remember the smell of that dock better than I remember most of my own deployments. Low tide brings up the stink of mudflats and kelp, sharp and briny. Diesel from the old engine my father retrofitted onto the Ferry in 1974 still clings to the wood pilings like a ghost. The brass bell Ezra hung on the landing post, the one you ring twice for coming across, 3 times for emergency, still has a green patina worn smooth in one spot from 130 years of hands. 3 generations of cutters are buried on a rise behind the boathouse, overlooking the channel. My father used to say the dead like to watch the boats go by. I believe him now more than ever. When I got back from the service, I wasn't rich. My pension covers groceries and not much else. I look, to anyone driving past in a Range Rover, like just another old man in a flannel shirt fixing a rotted piling. What they don't see is the folder in my truck's glove box. Copies of an 1893 territorial ferry franchise, an 1899 deed to both landings, notarized, recorded, never once challenged in court. That folder is worth more than every house on this peninsula combined, and nobody knows it exists yet. Not even me, not fully, not until I go looking for it 3 weeks from now. Marlene Sinclair, on the other hand, wants everyone to believe she built something. She's 52, married once, divorced with a settlement that funded her real estate license. She became president of the Saltmarsh Point Homeowners Association 4 years ago, right around the time the last available lots sold out, and the developer, Halbrook Coastal Partners, needed someone local to keep residents quiet about the bridge that was promised in 2019 and never built. Marlene drives a white Range Rover Autobiography, leased, always washed. She wears the same charcoal blazer to every HOA meeting, like a uniform, and carries a clipboard she barely glances at. It's a prop, mostly, something to hold while she delivers bad news in a voice that makes bad news sound like a favor. Her favorite line, the one she says to almost everyone who complains, is, "I understand your frustration, but the board has already voted." She talks about the ferry now like she talks about the community pool, an amenity, something the association provides. She's told residents, in board minutes I'll later pull under public records request, that the Cutter family generously donated ferry operations to the HOA years ago. That never happened. Nobody asked me. Nobody asked my father, who's been dead 6 years and never signed a single document handing anything to anyone. What Marlene actually did, and this part takes me weeks to fully understand, was quietly fold ferry operations into HOA common infrastructure on paper, sell residents recurring ferry share memberships, and use those payments, along with a bigger project she's been running on the side, to keep a very different kind of ledger afloat. But that Tuesday afternoon, standing at a padlocked gate with a clipboard and a $180 landing fee, all I know is this: she's cut off my neighbors from their homes, their doctors, their lives. And she's done it standing on a dock that belongs to a dead man's family, a family that just came home. I don't argue with her at the gate. I've learned that in 30 years of Navy contracts and county boards, the man who argues first loses the paper trail. So I just nod, take out my phone, and photograph the padlock, the fence, the Range Rover's plate, and Marlene's laminated notice, all timestamped 4:17 p.m. Tuesday, September 9th. The notice reads, Ferry Landing Transfer Agreement, executed 2019, Thomas Cutter, Grantor. Under it, a signature, my father's signature. I know my father's handwriting the way I know the sound of the tide. He signed everything with a hard slash under the C in Cutter, a habit from 40 years of signing manifests. This signature doesn't have it. The loop on the T leans the wrong way. It's close enough to fool somebody who never watched him sign a Christmas card. It's not close enough to fool me. I don't say that to Marlene. I photograph the document instead, front and back, and ask her politely for a copy. I'll have the office email it to you, she says, already turning back to her Range Rover. Once you're square on your dues. Dues? I haven't paid an HOA due in my life. My grandfather never signed the association's covenants back when the development first went in around the original ferry parcel in the 1990s, Ezra's land, and everything my father added to it was carved out of the plat specifically, recorded as excluded from common interest community by my father's own lawyer in 1994. I don't know that yet, not fully, not with the paperwork in hand, but I remember him telling me once, over a beer on this very dock, "Walt, I never signed their damn rulebook. Best decision I made." That night, I don't sleep on it. I write down everything while it's fresh. 4:17 p.m., the padlock, the plate number, the forged signature, Marlene's exact words. I email myself a time-stamped account. I've built enough incident reports for the Navy to know that memory rots and paper doesn't. 3 days later, a letter arrives, not from the HOA office, but from a collections firm in Tacoma. Notice of fine, $500 for unauthorized obstruction of association common area, dated the same day I photographed the padlock. The obstruction, apparently, is my truck, parked on my own boathouse ramp. I don't call and yell. I do something slower and worse for them. I go to the post office and send Marlene Sinclair and the HOA's registered agent certified letters, return receipt requested, requesting, under RCW 64.38.045, the association's obligation to produce original governance and financial documents to any member upon written request. I'm not a member. I make sure the letter says that too, in plain language. Please provide, within 30 days, the original 2019 Ferry Landing Transfer Agreement referenced in your notice, along with the notarization record, as I am not, and have never been, a party to this association. Here's what most homeowners don't know. An HOA board can vote on all the rules it wants, but a fine only holds legal weight if the underlying document, deed restriction, covenant, recorded agreement actually exists, was properly executed, and applies to the property in question. No document, no authority, just a clipboard and a bluff. I mail 3 copies, one to the HOA office, one to Marlene personally, care of the address on her lease application, which I got, legally, through the county assessor's public parcel records, one to myself for the file. Every letter goes out at 9:05 a.m. on a Thursday, and I keep every receipt. Then I go looking for the truth myself, because I've learned the second half of that lesson too. The county doesn't lose paper, even when people lose their manners. The Whitfield County Recorder's Office smells like every recorder's office in America. Old dust, toner, the particular mildew of basement archive rooms that never quite dry out. A clerk named Denise, who's worked there since before I left for the Navy, pulls the original 1899 deed for me without blinking. "Cutter's Landing," she says. "We get a request for this maybe once every 10 years. The deed is exactly what I remember my father describing. 2 landing parcels, east and west shore, granted to Ezra Cutter and his heirs and assigns forever, recorded in Book 4, page 112. Untouched, no transfer, no lien, no mention of any homeowners association, because the Saltmarsh Point HOA didn't exist for another 90 years. Then Denise finds the second document, the one that makes my hands go cold and steady at the same time. The Washington Territorial Ferry franchise, granted 1893, transferred through probate 3 times, last renewed under my name, Walter E. Cutter, in 2015, when my father, seeing his hands failing, quietly put the franchise renewal in my name while I was still active duty, and didn't think twice about signing what he mailed me. I remember signing something in a hurry between deployments. I never understood, until this exact moment in a basement in Washington State, what I'd signed. The franchise says, in language older than my grandfather, that the right to operate a public ferry crossing on this channel belongs exclusively to the franchise holder, and any obstruction of the franchise holder's access to the landings constitutes interference with a state-chartered common carrier, a crime, not a zoning dispute. The HOA doesn't own the ferry. The HOA doesn't own the landing. The HOA doesn't even have standing to charge a fee for a crossing. They have no legal authority to operate at all. I sit in that basement for a long time. Outside, gulls are screaming over the marina. I think about Marlene's clipboard, her voice telling me the board had already voted, like a vote could conjure a deed out of nothing. That's the small shield, the fine, the fake transfer, all of it built on paper that doesn't exist. I could beat that in small claims court in an afternoon. But it's Denise, flipping through the franchise renewal file, who finds the thing that turns this from a property dispute into something much bigger. Stapled behind my franchise renewal is a completely separate filing, a request submitted 18 months ago by the Saltmarsh Point HOA to the State Utilities and Transportation Commission, asking to establish a private ferry cooperative to replace what they called an abandoned family ferry service. Denied. Stamped in red. Insufficient franchise authority. Existing franchise active. They tried to take the franchise legally. The state told them no. They took it anyway. I meet Ruth Palmer 2 days after that at the little market near the mainland ferry stop, and she's the one who finally shows me how deep this goes. She's 78, thin as a reed, dragging a small green oxygen tank on a wheeled cart behind her, the tubing looped over her ears. Her husband, Frank, was a Navy corpsman, 2 tours, dead 9 years now. She's lived on Saltmarsh Point since 1981. "You're Thomas's boy," she says, before I even introduce myself. "You look just like him at the tiller," Ruth tells me, in a voice that shakes a little with each breath, that the HOA sent her a lien notice last month, $4,000 in unpaid ferry share assessments she says she never agreed to, on a house she's owned outright for 30 years. She can't drive the long way around the bay anymore. The oxygen supplier delivers to the mainland dock twice a week, and if she misses a crossing, she misses a refill. "I asked Marlene what the money was for," Ruth says. "She told me it was going toward the new bridge, said engineers were already working on it." She laughs, short and bitter. "I've been hearing about that bridge since 2019. Where does the ferry money go, Walter? Because it sure isn't sitting." That question is what sends me back into the records, not just the deed and the franchise, but the HOA's own filings with the Washington Secretary of State, then Halbrook Coastal Partners developer disclosures, then a set of investor documents Ruth still had in a shoebox from when Marlene personally sold her a $2,000 founding ferry share back in 2020. By the time I lay it all out on my grandfather's cedar table that night, franchise denial, fake transfer agreement, 61 months of $340 dues, Ruth's shoebox of bridge bonds that were never registered as securities anywhere, the number in front of me isn't $500 in fake fines anymore. It's $2.4 million, collected from people like Ruth Palmer, for a bridge that was never permitted, a ferry that was never theirs, resting on top of a franchise the state of Washington already told them, in writing, they had no right to touch. Marlene Sinclair thinks she's running a homeowners association. What she's actually running is a felony. I sit with that word for a long moment. Felony. Not a phrase I use lightly. 30 years in uniform teaches you to be careful with words that carry weight like that. But I've read the statute twice now. RCW 9A.5 6.030. Theft in the first degree. Property or services exceeding $5,000, obtained by color or aid of deception. $2.4 million is not a grey area. It's a number a prosecutor could build a career on. I go back to Ruth's place the next morning, a little cedar shake house set back from the water with wind chimes made from old shell casings. Frank's doing, she tells me, something he brought back from his second tour and never explained. She's on her porch when I pull up, oxygen tank humming beside her rocking chair, and she doesn't wait for me to speak. "You found something," she says. "I can see it on you." Frank used to get that same look before he told me bad news. I lay it out for her slow, the way you'd explain a diagnosis to someone who already suspects the worst. The denied franchise application, the fake transfer agreement with my father's forged signature, her shoebox of founding ferry shares that were never filed as securities with the state, never registered anywhere, existing only as glossy certificates with a gold foil seal and Marlene's looping signature. Ruth doesn't cry, she's harder than that, but her hands, folded in her lap, go white at the knuckles. $2,000, she says quietly. That was Frank's last VA back paycheck. I put it into that bridge because Marlene sat right here on this porch and told me it would double property values by 2022. She looks out at the channel, at the grey water sliding past. There's no bridge, is there? There's no bridge, I confirm. There's no permit for a bridge. There's no engineering study. I checked with the county. Nothing's ever been filed. She's quiet a long time. Then, what do we do? I tell her the truth, that I don't fully know yet, that building a case against someone like Marlene Sinclair means documents, timestamps, witnesses, patience. That anger feels good, but doesn't hold up in front of a judge. Ruth nods slowly, the tubing hissing faint under her nose. I've got nowhere else to be, she says. 2 hours to the mainland and back, when the tide's right. You want a witness who's been paying that woman since the start, you've got one. Word moves fast on a peninsula with 61 houses and 1 road. By that evening, I've had 4 different neighbours stop by the boathouse. Carl Denning, who runs the little bait shop, the Ferraros, a young couple with 2 kids who just built near the point, old Hank Voss, who fought in Korea and doesn't trust anyone under 70, myself apparently included, until I show him the franchise document with the state seal. So you're telling me, Carl says, turning his cap in his hands, that woman's been billing us for a ferry that legally belongs to you the whole time? Since 2015, I say, since before most of you moved in. Hank spits off the dock into the water. And the bridge money? Sitting somewhere it shouldn't be. I don't have proof of where yet. I will. Nobody cheers. Nobody claps me on the back like this is a movie. They just go quiet. The way people go quiet when a number that large lands on people who don't have much room to lose it. Ruth reaches over and squeezes my hand once, her grip surprisingly strong for someone hauling an oxygen tank everywhere she goes. Your grandfather rang that bell every morning at 6, she says. Never missed a day, sick or well. You ring it again, Walter. People need to know the ferry's still theirs to use, just not theirs to steal. Here's what most homeowners don't know. Once you've formally notified an HOA in writing that a fine or lien is based on a document you dispute, especially one involving a forged signature, the board is legally obligated to pause collection until the dispute is resolved. RCW 64.38.050 makes that clear enough that even Marlene's own attorney, a tired-looking man named Gary Boker, who I meet exactly once, tells her so in an email I later obtain through discovery. She ignores him. Thursday, 6:40 a.m. The fog hasn't burned off the channel yet, sitting low and grey over the water like a held breath. I'm on the dock early, the way I have been every morning since Ruth's porch conversation, because I've learned that people who are stealing money tend to get sloppy when they think nobody's watching, and dawn is when nobody watches. I hear the truck before I see it, a flatbed with the Halbrook Coastal Partners logo on the door, backing down the gravel toward the east landing, the one my great-grandfather built, the one with the brass bell still bolted to its post. 2 men climb out. One of them is carrying a bolt cutter. I don't move. I don't shout. I pull my phone from my jacket pocket, brace it against a piling to steady the shot, and I start recording. The taller man, I'll later learn his name is Dale Kessing, a maintenance contractor the HOA pays under a landscaping and grounds line item that somehow also covers demolition work, walks straight up to my grandfather's boathouse door. Not the fence, not the gate they'd already padlocked, the boathouse itself, where the ferry engine sits, where Ezra's original hand crank mechanism is preserved behind glass like a museum piece because my father never had the heart to scrap it. Dale cuts the padlock on the boathouse in one clean snap. Metal hits gravel. The sound carries flat and hard across the still water. Sinclair said, "Get it out by end of day," he says to the other man, loud enough that my phone picks up every word. She wants the ferry engine hauled to the marina auction. Says the family abandoned the equipment. I don't run down there. Running gets you in a shouting match, and shouting matches get edited out of context on somebody else's phone. Instead, I call the county sheriff's non-emergency line, calm, giving my name, my location, the time, 6:47 a.m., and I state plainly that I am witnessing what I believe to be theft and criminal trespass in progress at a private landing under my legal ownership. By the time Deputy Renata Ochoa arrives 11 minutes later, Dale and his partner have the Ferry engine, a 1974 Chrysler Marine block my father rebuilt twice with his own hands, half-loaded onto the flatbed with a chain hoist. I've got 6 minutes of video. I've got timestamps. I've got the boathouse padlock, snapped clean, lying in the gravel where it fell. Deputy Ochoa doesn't need much convincing once I show her the franchise document and the deed, both of which I now keep laminated in a folder in my truck because Denise, back at the recorder's office, warned me, half joking, that I'd want copies on me the way some men carry a sidearm. Dale gets a citation for third-degree criminal trespass and theft under RCW 9A.56.050. He also, wisely, tells the deputy exactly who told him to do it and when, because a man being paid $22 an hour has no interest in taking a felony charge for someone else's homeowners association. Marlene isn't there. Marlene, I learn later, was 40 miles away at a spa in Gig Harbor while her contractor cut a 130-year-old padlock off a dead man's boathouse. She finds out about the arrest from a panicked text message, and within the hour she's called Deputy Ochoa's non-emergency line herself, insisting there's been a misunderstanding regarding association maintenance responsibilities. There's no misunderstanding on video. Video doesn't misunderstand. That should have been enough to make her stop. It doesn't. 3 days later, Marlene finds a different target, one who can't fight back with a phone camera and a Navy pension. Ruth's lien notice escalates without warning. A letter arrives by courier, not mail, courier, like it's urgent business, instead of an old woman's home, informing her that the unpaid ferry share assessment, now grown to $4,600 with penalties, will result in the association filing a formal lien against her property within 10 days, per what the letter calls governing CC&Rs, the same fictional covenants that were never lawfully recorded against Cutter land, and, as it turns out, were never properly amended to include Ruth's parcel either, since her lot predates the current HOA declaration by 6 years. I find Ruth on her porch again, the letter shaking slightly in her hand, her oxygen concentrator humming beside her like a patient heartbeat. They can't take my house over $4,000, she says, but there's a question underneath the statement, the kind of fear that comes from a generation raised to believe paperwork always wins. They can't take your house over $4,000 they were never entitled to charge you in the first place, I tell her. But I need you to do something for me, Ruth. I need you to not pay it, not a dime. And I need you to let me photograph that letter, and I need you to come with me to a hearing. She looks at me a long moment, Frank's wind chimes clicking softly behind her in the shore breeze. You've got something bigger planned than just my $4,000. I do. Then you tell me exactly what you need, Walter Cutter, and I'll do it. Frank didn't raise me to sit quiet while somebody robs a widow blind. What I need, it turns out, is patience, the same currency that wins wars and lawsuits both. Over the next 2 weeks, I do the quiet work nobody puts in a highlight reel. I file a formal request with the Washington Utilities and Transportation Commission, confirming, in writing, that the Cutter Ferry franchise remains active and exclusive, and that any party operating or charging fees for passage across the channel without franchise authority is in violation of RCW 81.84.010. I get that confirmation letter within 9 business days, on commission letterhead, and I make 4 copies. I file, through an attorney I hire for exactly this purpose, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Priya Anand out of Tacoma, who specializes in HOA fraud litigation, a formal notice to the Saltmarsh Point HOA Board that I intend to resume independent ferry operations under my franchise, effective the following Monday, and that any interference with landing access will be treated as obstruction of a state-chartered common carrier and reported accordingly. I request and receive a county permit to reopen and reflag both landings for public ferry use, which requires an inspector to walk the site, meaning there will be an official, credentialed witness present the day I reopen. I ask Deputy Ochoa, informally, whether she'd be willing to be present as well, given the trespass incident already on record, and she agrees, off duty, because by now even she wants to see how this ends. And I quietly gather every resident willing to sign a sworn statement about what they paid, when, and why, Ruth's shoebox of founding ferry shares, Carl's cancelled checks going back 4 years, the Ferraro's email correspondence in which Marlene personally promised bridge completion no later than Q3 2022. 14 households sign statements within a week. Priya tells me 14 sworn statements alongside a $2.4 million discrepancy in unfiled securities and a denied state franchise application is, in her words, not a civil case anymore, Walter. That's a referral to the Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division and the county prosecutor, both. I don't tell Marlene any of this. I don't need to. She's still operating like a woman who believes a clipboard and a leased Range Rover make her untouchable, still sending lien notices to a 78-year-old widow on oxygen, still telling her board, according to minutes I obtain later, that the Cutter situation will resolve itself once he realizes he can't run a ferry alone. She's right that I can't run it alone. She's wrong about everything else. Monday morning, I ring the bell on the East Landing twice, the way Ezra did, the way Silas did, the way my father did for 40 years before his hands gave out. The sound rolls flat and clean across the fog-covered water, and for the first time in weeks, the ferry engine, recovered from Dale's flatbed by sheriff's order, turns over, catches, and holds a steady, stubborn idle. Ruth is standing at the landing with her oxygen cart, first in line, sworn statement folded in her coat pocket, county inspector's clipboard already noting the timestamp beside mine. I have no idea yet that Marlene Sinclair is about to make the single worst decision of her life in front of all of them. The fog burns off by 9, and by then there are 11 cars parked along the gravel shoulder above the landing, more people than I've seen on this stretch of road since my father's funeral. Word travels fast on a peninsula with 1 road and 61 houses, especially when that word is, the ferry's running again and something's about to happen. Marlene arrives at 9:15, Range Rover skidding slightly on the gravel, clipboard already in hand before she's fully out of the driver's seat. She's wearing the charcoal blazer. She always wears the charcoal blazer. This landing is under an active association cease and desist, she announces, loud enough for the small crowd to hear, striding toward the boarding ramp where Ruth is already seated on the ferry's bench, oxygen tank secured beside her, County Inspector Diane Marsh standing with her clipboard a few feet from mine, and Deputy Ochoa leaning against her cruiser, arms crossed, watching. There's no cease and desist that applies here, Miss Sinclair, I say, and I hold up the laminated Utilities and Transportation Commission letter, the one with the state seal, angling it so the small crowd behind her can see it too. This franchise has never lapsed. Your board's application to establish a competing ferry service was denied 18 months ago. I have the denial letter. Would you like a copy? Something shifts in her face. Not quite panic yet, but the first crack in 4 years of clipboard confidence. That's not accurate. The board has documentation showing the family transferred. The 2019 transfer agreement your office produced, I say, keeping my voice level, the way you keep your voice level when you're reading coordinates back during a storm, bears my father's forged signature. I've had it examined. So has the sheriff's office. I nod toward Deputy Ochoa, who doesn't move from where she's leaning, but her eyes stay locked on Marlene now, sharp and unblinking. Marlene's grip tightens on the clipboard. This is a private matter between homeowners and their association. None of this is any of your business, Deputy. It became my business, HOA says mildly. The day your contractor cut a padlock off private property with a bolt cutter on video, Miss Sinclair. I've been meaning to follow up with you about that. The crowd behind her has gone very quiet. Carl Denning has his phone out now too, recording. So does one of the Ferraros. I don't think Marlene notices, not yet, too focused on me, on the folder in my hand, on the sudden realization that the ground she's standing on isn't hers and never was. Ruth, Marlene says suddenly, pivoting, her voice sliding into that syrupy, condescending warmth I remember from the very first day at the padlocked gate. Ruth, honey, you don't need to be part of this. Why don't you come sit in my car, out of this damp air, and we'll get your assessment sorted out privately, the two of us. I'm sitting right here, Marlene, Ruth says, not raising her voice at all, which somehow makes it land harder than shouting would. $2,000 of my Frank's back pay went into your bridge that never got a permit. You told me it would double my property value. You told everybody that. She reaches into her coat pocket, unfolds a piece of paper with a shaking hand, and holds it up, not to Marlene, but to Diane Marsh, the county inspector. That's my sworn statement. There's 13 more like it in Mr. Cutter's folder. And that's the moment Marlene Sinclair does the thing that ends her. She lunges, not violently, not dramatically, just a sharp, panicked grab for the folder in my hand, the one with the franchise letter and the denial notice, as if snatching it back could unmake the last 3 weeks. Her fingers close on the edge of the paper and tear it. Deputy Ochoa is off the cruiser and beside her in 2 strides. Miss Sinclair, step back from Mr. Cutter, please. That is stolen HOA property. I have every right. That document, Ochoa says, steady as a tide table, has a Washington State Utilities and Transportation Commission seal on it. It isn't HOA property. It was never HOA property. And you just committed assault in front of a county inspector, a sheriff's deputy, and roughly a dozen witnesses with their phones out. I don't gloat. I've imagined this moment, if I'm honest, more than once over the last few weeks. Imagine saying something sharp, something that would land like a closing argument. Instead, standing on the dock my great-grandfather built with his own hands, I just reach past her, calmly, and ring the brass bell twice. The sound rolls out over the water, clean and steady, the way it has for 130 years. "Ferry's running, folks," I say. "Board first, please." Deputy Ochoa cuffs Marlene Sinclair at 9:31 a.m. on charges of theft in the first degree, forgery, and assault, with the county prosecutor's office already looped in from the referral Priya Anand filed the week before. Marlene doesn't say much as they walk her to the cruiser, past a small crowd of neighbours who paid her association $340 a month for 4 years to cross water that was never hers to charge for. Carl Denning still has his phone out, recording every step. Ruth watches the cruiser pull away, oxygen tubing hissing softly, and reaches over to squeeze my hand once, the same way she did on her porch. "Frank would have liked that, Belle," she says. "He always did like a clean ending." It isn't quite the ending yet, but it's close. The investigation that follows takes 4 months. The Washington Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division, working alongside the Whitfield County prosecutor, subpoenas 4 years of HOA financial records, Marlene's personal accounts, and Halbrook Coastal Partners development files. What they find is worse than even I expected. Of the $2.4 million collected in Ferry shares and bridge bonds, only $340,000 was ever spent on anything resembling ferry or landing maintenance. The rest, roughly $2.06 million, moved through a Shell LLC registered to Marlene's ex-husband's cousin, then into a vacation property in Scottsdale, a leased Range Rover, and a retirement account Marlene had quietly built under a maiden name. Marlene Sinclair pleads guilty to first-degree theft, securities fraud for the unregistered bridge bonds, and forgery in exchange for the assault charge being dropped to a lesser count. She's sentenced to 7 years with mandatory restitution of $2.4 million to to 61 affected households, to be paid first from asset forfeiture, the Scottsdale property, sold at auction for $410,000, the Range Rover, repossessed, and the retirement account, frozen and liquidated at $380,000. The remainder becomes a court-ordered payment plan she'll likely still be paying when she's released. Dale Kessing, the contractor, testifies against her in exchange for his trespass charge being reduced to a fine, which the court orders him to pay directly to the Cutter family for the damaged boathouse door, $1,200, which I later donate straight to the volunteer fire department that services the Peninsula. Gary Boker, the HOA's attorney who'd warned Marlene in writing to stop collections and been ignored, cooperates fully with investigators and is never charged. Halbrook Coastal Partners, the developer, settled separately with the state for $220,000 after records show they knew the bridge was never permitted but let Marlene keep selling bridge bonds anyway, since her fraud kept residents from organizing against the developer's own unmet promises. That case is still working through civil court as I write this down. Ruth Palmer gets her $4,600 phantom lien vacated by court order within a week, along with the $2,000 she put into the fake bridge bonds, repaid in full from the first restitution disbursement. At the community meeting held to reorganize the HOA under new bylaws that, this time, exclude Cutter's Landing explicitly and permanently, the 61 households vote unanimously to make Ruth Palmer their new president. She accepts, oxygen tank parked beside the folding table, and the first motion she passes is a permanent fee waiver for ferry crossings for any resident over 70 or on fixed income. I keep running the ferry myself, same as my father, same as his father before him. Some mornings I still expect to see Marlene's white Range Rover parked crooked across the ramp, clipboard in hand, telling me I need an appointment to use my own dock. It never comes back. The gravel where it used to sit has already grown over with beach grass. I sit at my great-grandfather's cedar table most evenings now, running my thumb over the EC carved into the underside, listening to the bell creak faintly in the wind off the boathouse. Here's what I learned, watching all of this unfold. People trust paperwork more than they trust their own eyes. Until somebody finally shows them the paperwork was never real. An HOA board can vote on anything it wants, but a vote doesn't create a deed, and it definitely doesn't erase one. The people most willing to steal from a community are usually the ones who talk the loudest about protecting it. And the quietest, most patient move, documenting everything, saying nothing, waiting for the moment the truth simply becomes undeniable, beats shouting every single time. Ruth still comes down to the landing most mornings just to hear the bell. Last week she told me something that's been sitting with me since. Frank always said there'd be a second wave after a storm like this, she said, watching the ferry cut its wake toward the mainland. Said the folks who profited alongside Marlene don't just disappear, they regroup. I didn't think much of it at the time. Then, 3 days ago, a certified letter arrived from Halbrook Coastal Partners legal counsel, informing me that the developer intends to challenge my franchise's exclusivity in front of the County Planning Commission on the grounds that the unbuilt bridge was never actually abandoned and that Saltmarsh Point residents deserve a modern transportation solution the Cutter family, in their words, cannot unilaterally obstruct. I haven't decided yet whether to laugh or start pulling files, but I've got a feeling this isn't over. I read the letter twice at the cedar table, then a third time out loud, just to hear how the words sounded against the sound of the tide outside. Cannot unilaterally obstruct, as if 130 years of my family ringing that bell twice a day was the obstruction, and not the bridge that never had a permit, a survey, or a single dollar of honest funding behind it. I drive over to Ruth's place with the letter still in my hand. She's on the porch, same rocking chair, oxygen humming its steady rhythm beside her, and she doesn't even wait for me to sit down before she says, "Told you, storms like this always leave a second wave." They're saying the bridge was never abandoned, I tell her. They're saying I'm obstructing a public transportation solution. Ruth laughs, short and dry, the kind of laugh that turns into a small cough she waves off before I can worry about it. Honey, Halbrook Coastal Partners hasn't poured concrete on this peninsula since before Frank passed. Now suddenly they've got a transportation solution. She shakes her head. That's not a bridge plan. That's a lawsuit dressed up as one. She's not wrong, and I tell her so. Priya Anand says the same thing over the phone that evening, her voice flat and unimpressed in the way lawyers get when they've seen the same trick 100 times. It's a pressure play, Walter. They know a planning commission challenge costs you time and money, even if you win. They're hoping you fold before the hearing. I don't tell her I have any intention of folding. I've spent 30 years building things that hold up against water pressure measured in tons per square foot. A letter from a law firm doesn't scare me the way it's supposed to. Word gets around the peninsula fast, same as it always does. By Thursday, Carl Denning's bait shop has become an unofficial war room. 6 or 7 neighbours crowded around the counter, arguing about what Halbrook's really after. They want the bridge parcel rezoned, Hank Voss says, tapping a folded county map against the counter. Bridge never gets built. It's about the land on both ends. Marina rights. That's the play. They're not getting my franchise, I say, and I mean it plainly, without heat, the way you'd state a fact about tide charts. The commission can hear whatever they want to file. The state already told them once their bridge cooperative had no franchise authority. Nothing's changed since then, except they're angrier about it. The Ferraro's oldest boy, maybe 9 years old, is sitting on a stool by the cooler, listening to all of it with wide eyes, like we're discussing pirates instead of zoning law. His mother catches me looking and shrugs, half embarrassed. He wants to ring the ferry bell someday, she says. Says it's the most important job on the whole peninsula. I think about that, walking back to my truck, gravel crunching under my boots, gulls circling low over the marina like they're waiting for something to happen. Maybe it is the most important job on the peninsula. Important enough, apparently, that a corporation with lawyers in 3 states still wants to take it from a family that's held it since 1891. I unlock the boathouse that night, run my hand along the brass bell, and think about Ezra Cutter cranking that first cable ferry by hand, half frozen, because 6 oyster families needed a way across the water and nobody else was going to build it for them. Halbrook Coastal Partners is about to learn exactly what that kind of stubbornness looks like 130 years later.